My new employee ran a background check on me, paid to get my records, and got my booking photo pulled up on our company's computer, so I got the HR check him. I started a new position recently and was promoted quickly to a management position. Great. I have a long supervisory background, looking forward to helping in a wider capacity. One of my direct reports is a very conscientious and ambitious young man named Scott who I have found pleasant to work with. Last week, during a normal conversation about a project, Scott brought up that he had done a background search on me and then asked me about an arrest on my record, an insurance snafu that led to a driver's license snafu, and when I was pulled over for a normal traffic stop in a rather conservative county, I spent a night in lockup, which was both humiliating and illuminating. This is not immediately Googleable. I gave it a try myself after he brought it up, and some of the specificity of the details he used leads me to believe he went to one of the publicly available background report sites and paid the nominal fee to obtain a detailed report. His question was framed as that he had been doing some research and wanted to clarify what happened in X state because it wasn't clear if it, the arrest, was in X or Y state. I lived in Y state more recently, but there's nothing easily found that links the two without paying for it. At the moment, I answered truthfully that these items were for more than a decade ago and were the result of a particular set of circumstances. I then excused myself from the conversation and returned to my office. The longer I think about it, the more weirded out I am. Scott would like to advance and I feel like a follow-up conversation is definitely warranted, but I'm struggling with an approach aside from hey, you super violated a boundary for me and that will go over like a ton of bricks if you do it with future managers. To be fair, this is an overtly aggressive office culture and asking to explain your professional background in a fair amount of detail to coworkers/employees is par for the course. But while I understand having a background check run by the company during the hiring process, I'd like to keep my personal background personal. And while I'm not wild about discussing this embarrassing incident, my reaction was more of a how and why did you obtain this information? Then a deep, dark secret that I'm worried might come to light. How do I let go of my weirded out feeling and how do I best address this in a follow-up conversation? Update. Scott was indeed a younger employee and deeply convinced of the superiority of his own intellect and gender. He had a 5, 10, and 15-year life plan with ambitious goals. Unfortunately, this was coupled with no more sense than God gave a goose. His previous work experience in an unrelated field left him with the impression that it was reasonable to deeply examine the people around him but then verify his findings through research. As part of his 5-year plan, he applied for many roles within the company in search of advancement, despite not having relevant experience nor demonstrating development in any key skill areas. As mentioned in my letter, I was hired on in a line-level position and then promoted to a management position within a couple of months. In that industry, career advancement is often tied to reassignment in diverse geographic locations, going where the work is, and arriving at a new location is accompanied by sharing bona fides with the team to build connections. Imagine you've worked for 20 years for the same company, but have moved 8 times and never worked in the same place/with the same team more than 2 years in a row. I had spent a great deal of time grabbing opportunities as they arose, living out of suitcases, and working far too much. I had garnered some nice accolades in some faintly glamorous locales, but anyone who has done it knows that the luster is surface level only. Scott was intensely interested in my career experience and how I progressed in the field. Coupled with his desire for promotion and deeply flawed perceptions around reasonable follow-up, this led to the rather extraordinary situation I wrote about. Armed with the knowledge that Scott was about as intuitive as a pile of bricks, I was planning a follow-up conversation the next time we worked together. He beat me to the punch when he asked me again about the information he had found as soon as I approached his desk. This time a copy of my booking photo pulled up on his screen. I reacted much more decisively this time, telling him to close the browsing window immediately and pulling him into the office for a one-on-one conversation. Looking back, I think I used your phrasing almost verbatim around work boundaries and everyone deserving privacy. Scott was mostly confused by this response. In his view, it was perfectly reasonable to look for deeper information about almost anyone. His rationale behind asking me about what he'd found was he wanted to alert me this information was out there. I told him it was unacceptable behavior and demonstrated incredibly poor judgment that he'd dig this far into any colleague, much less his manager. Then to bring it up multiple times, the company completed background checks for every employee. If they had proceeded with the hire, one would assume that nothing relevant was in the report. I also let him know this was such an egregious situation, we would be documenting both conversations and issuing a write-up, and this endangered his future with the company. After distance from the situation, I genuinely believe Scott was an incredibly intelligent person demonstrating that anyone can be an absolute idiot. Did I document the situation in detail? Absolutely. Did I discuss this with HR and my boss? Absolutely, and she was ready to fire Scott. HR was flabbergasted and incredibly helpful in their handling of the situation. My documentation plan was supported by the agreement that Scott was on his final chance. Did Scott get promoted to another position? Not while I was there. After this incident, he did demonstrate an earnest desire to improve as a team member and make amends. We parted on decent terms. I actually wound up suggesting he read on regularly. I have no idea where Scott has landed, but I wish him well. I will not be Googling him.